Hey students, welcome to another World Geography video. I'm Mr. Johnson, and first, a quick joke for you. A priest, a minister, and a rabbit are on their way to give blood. The priest walks up to go give blood and says, "I'm an AB negative," and so he gets let in. The minister, she comes up and says, "I'm a B positive," and so they let her in. And the rabbit comes up and says, "I think I'm a typo." There you go. There's your fun one. Okay, Southeast Asia. Physical characteristics. I promised you I'd be fast with this, so we're going to breeze through a lot of this. The big deal to understand in all of this, though, is mountains affect a lot of Asia. Asia is huge, but the impact from the environment plays into a lot of characteristics. So what you see here, first off, is the climate regions. Remember, Asia's big, and yet we have some really large climate regions based on the rain shadow effect that's caused by a lot of mountains, the dry areas of plateau and desert in the middle. So if you look here in the smaller picture, you'll see that population is greatly impacted. Each one of those dots is 100,000 people, which is roughly the size of Spotsylvania County in population. So that's an estimate of where people live, and you can see how densely packed it is for what a large area it is. And the other thing to keep in mind is we're looking at roughly half the population of the world in that picture right there. So, puts in perspective. Now, the big deal here, though, are the mountain ranges. This is Mount Fuji. That's the Himalayas. They're huge. And now for a cool video of a guy flying through one of the mountains.
Just so happy. I'm just so happy to still be here. You know, my time in this world is limited, but the things that I can do with that time are not.
And we're back with climates and weather. I told you to be fast. So obviously, just showed you a lot of climates over the place because after all, it's Asia. But the next big thing to talk about are the natural hazards, particularly monsoons, which is just large seasonal rain that causes lots of flooding. Here's a little clip of that.
Our top story today, the monsoon has come early, bringing with it both joy and sorrow. A strong start to the monsoon has brightened the prospects of a bumper output of summer crops such as rice, oilseeds and cotton in a country where the majority of agricultural land is rain-fed. But this year, the heavy rains have also caused widespread havoc and devastation across the country. The worst affected is the state of Uttarakhand, where 26 people have died due to landslides.
An early monsoon left behind a state in deluge. Houses collapsed like a pack of cards, vehicles were washed away, all communication links broken. 24,000 pilgrims stranded without food for 2 days, even as authorities cancelled the Char Dham Yatra. The torrential rain swept away roads and bridges, almost cutting off Uttarakhand from the rest of the country.
Then there's also volcanoes. So listen to this eruption here, as there's two separate ones, but one of the ones I want to show you particularly is you're going to hear the boom of what happens during a volcanic eruption. So here's two little videos on that.
out for the shock, it's coming. Holy smoking Toledos. Man.
Next up, the influence of water. Water is super important. I know, duh. The biggest thing here is capturing water for rice cultivation. That's what you see in the picture that has all of those rice paddies. Both of those are reflected light from rice paddies that are built on hillsides to trap more water. Also, shipping and transportation is what water is mainly used for as well. So not just for farming, but also just the influence of being near the coast and having some of the busiest world ports. So, soil. This video here that's going to show you in a little bit is to show you why this is called the Yellow River. The Yellow River is probably responsible for the most deaths caused by a natural hazard of any place in the world. And the reason why it's so nasty is because the Yellow River is filled with this light topsoil. And so because of that topsoil, it gets into the water, but it's so thick, most people don't always drown in the water, which is filling with water in your lungs. It's suffocation, where your lungs are blocked from breathing. That's how bad it is. So here's a little clip showing you about that.
太壮观了，这真是像这个诗人所说的，这个黄河流水天上来，真是像天上来一样，哎。
Next up, landforms, particularly deserts, affect this region. The plateau of Tibet is quite dry and open after the Himalayas. It's a large area that's just really elevated, but also not much going for it in terms of rainfall and whatnot. It's quite dry. So economic characteristics. See, that was fast. First, the thing to keep in mind is that these regions have all kinds of economic activity, whether it's subsistence farming. Remember, that's farming for your own needs, but it also could be high industrialized technological production of personal electronics, computers, cheap toys for whatever reason, shoes and clothing. So it has a wide variety and range of different economic activity. But one thing to keep in mind here is here's the annual minimum salary on average for a worker. Now, this is a little bit dated, so this is old. However, in the United States, the minimum wage salary is roughly above $20,000 a year. And there are people who are making much less than that. As you can see, Myanmar's got some economic problems as well as political problems being under dictatorship. But you see countries like Cambodia and Bangladesh where their prices are quite low for their salary. That's why a lot of our clothes are made there. It's made there because our highest cost making clothes is the sewing. And so paying an American worker is going to be expensive and cost more. Next up, this is a major area of international trade. They participate in what's called the global market. So obviously you have stuff that's made in China, made in Thailand, made in Taiwan, made in Indonesia. You get the point, Malaysia. But just for fun, I triple dog dare you, check the shoes you have. Where were they made? Check your clothing. Where was that made? Check those things and just see, where are some of the stuff that you wear or use or make? Where was all that made? There are countries that are newly industrializing in the past 20 years or so. South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong still in there, and Singapore. And Singapore, I don't know if you've heard, has had one of the best responses to a highly urbanized area to the COVID virus. Another thing to keep in mind with them, however, is they're very strict when it comes to drug laws. If you see where Singapore is, and I'll show you on this map, that little red dot is Singapore. And so that little spot is probably one of the busiest straits, the Strait of Malacca, in the world. And as you can see, this is a map of annual passages of boats. So every dot is one annual trip. Next up, China's in transition from a centrally planned economy. What that means is the government of China, when it first started out, they were only making goods based on what the government said. So everyone had to make what the government dictated. That's called a centrally planned economy, and that's what happens in a communism. However, that's changing in communist China because it's not working out for them. They realize because of Hong Kong as an example and the Guangzhou province in the south, that's been much more profitable for them, and that's where you get the wealthy Chinese, and that's spread to the relative wealth throughout the country. So here's one example of how they fare in wealth, and you can see where the wealthiest areas are, usually the ones along the coast. Now, further on, there's a few things that mess with this. So one of them is how expensive it is to get married. So I'm going to show you several different videos on how expensive it is to get married in China because of their wealth. So now what I want to show you is the first video is what's called the bride price, how expensive it is to get married and what that means for people and what that concept is. Second video I'm going to show you is the cost of any couple getting married and how that can be quite restrictive. And the third one is to show you the wealth of some of these people in China, what these dowries and gifts are.
A newlywed bride from Xinjiang, China, was married with a dowry worth the equivalent of over $160 million. The wedding gifts from her business tycoon father named Wu Rubiao included a Mercedes-Benz and a Porsche and 4 boxes of gold, 5 million shares of his company, and several properties like a retail store in Guangzhou City and a few villas. The proud father even handed over 15 million yen to charities for good luck. His daughter married a man that she went to school with from kindergarten through high school. Other wealthy families from Xinjiang have been known to give large sums or expensive gifts when their daughters are married. Zhu Liaji reportedly gave his daughter a dowry of 200 million yen in November of 2011, and Wu Jingbiao decided to give about the same amount when his daughter was married this year. Marriage can be expensive, but so can divorce. A man in Hong Kong had to cough up what may be the largest divorce settlement in Hong Kong to his wife of 8 years. He has been ordered to pay her the equivalent of over $150 million. The largest divorce settlement in the world happened in 1998 when Rupert Murdoch paid his wife of 32 years $1.7 billion.
Now wedding bells are in the air here with Chinese New Year, a popular time for couples to tie the knot. But this year, saying I do comes with a very heavy price tag. Xinhua reports that both rising commodity prices and standards of living have led to soaring costs in recent years. In fact, according to industry reports, the cost of getting married has increased 46-fold in the past 3 decades. And today, 60% of couples nationwide spend at least $4,700 to tie the knot, while 10% spend around $15,800. And the average price only gets steeper when you look at second and third tier cities, where it stands at about $160,000. But it's couples in China's first tier cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou who have to shell out the most. There, the average price to get married has skyrocketed to $315,000. But why are costs so high? Well, it's because couples are expected to have certain possessions before their actual ceremony, which deem them ready to say, "I do," in the eyes of society. In fact, here, it's often referred to as the Big Three. And let's take a look at how meeting criteria has changed over time. The Global Times reports that in the 1970s, couples needed a domestically made bicycle, a sewing machine, and a watch manufactured here in Beijing. The products added up to about $60, which sounds affordable, but the average disposable income for a family during that time was just over $50, which meant buying those three items took years of saving. In the 1980s, the Big Three were replaced by a domestically made refrigerator, a Japanese brand color TV, and a Shanghai-made washing machine. With a total price tag of about $300, couples had to work for about 9 years to pay off the products. In come the 1990s, when marriage preparation meant owning a Japanese or Chinese-made air conditioner, a Panasonic hi-fi sound system, and a Sony VCR. With the price of the items almost $2,000 higher than the average disposable income, couples had to save for longer, about 10 years. And finally, enter the 21st century, when the Big Three turned into the Big Two, a house and a car. In the past decade, the average disposable income for a family climbed to $3,000, but rising inflation cut into purchasing power. As a result, getting enough money together for a house and a car, costing a combined $240,000, was impossible for most to do in an entire lifetime. And don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we're looking at the top 3 most expensive cities for couples when it comes to saying "I do." That's up next.
China's staggering bride prices have been a recurring topic of conversation on Chinese social media over the past few years. And recently, it became a trending topic again when Chinese media channel K-News went to a small village in Gansu province, which is one of China's poorest provinces, and exposed just how extreme the marriage market is there, with men desperate to get married and women being treated like empresses, demanding extremely high amounts of money to get married. A bride price is the amount of money paid for by the groom's family to the bride's family upon marriage. And although customs can vary from region to region, it is prevalent throughout China. But there's this growing trend since the 1980s that you see that in the least developed areas of China, the bride prices are the highest. And this is especially a problem in China's so-called bare branch villages. A bare branch is a man of a certain age who is still unmarried, a little bit like China's leftover women, but then these are the men. And bare branch villages are a direct result of China's one-child policy and its traditional preference for sons, which has caused a huge shortage of women. So what you see now in the countryside area is these villages where you have a lot of men who are looking for a wife, but not enough women, and the women that are left ask for huge amounts of money in order to be able to marry them, because they can pick whoever they want. And this is causing a huge problem because these men are not able to afford these bride prices. So how high is this bride price? Well, in Qingyang area in Gansu province, in the year 2000, they would pay around 3,000 RMB, which is something like $440 for the bride price on average. And now, 17 years later, in 2017, the average bride price in this area varies between 150,000 to 200,000 RMB, which is between $22,000 up to $30,000. But think that the men who work in this area on average only make 100 RMB per day, which is $14 per day. How could they ever afford a bride price of $30,000? So what you see is that these men are complaining now that for them the bride price is unaffordable, while these women sit in their houses and act like empresses. According to the article of K News, some women receive up to 30 men in their house. Every single day, matchmakers bring young bachelors to their house and they can pick whoever they want, but more importantly, they can choose whoever pays the highest bride price. And it's not just the bride price that is the problem. Actually, the whole process for getting married in these Bear Branch villages is very time consuming and it costs a lot of money. The first stage is to get registered at a matchmaker's office. The second stage is to meet a girl and bring her gifts and make sure that the meeting goes well. Third stage, if all goes well, is to go on a date which the man has to pay. Or the fourth stage is that the bride's family will check out if the groom's house is in good shape and if the house and the furniture is good enough for their daughter. And then the final stage is the negotiation of the bride price, which is extremely tricky because asking a price that is too low could be really bad for the bride family. They could become the scandal of the town if their bride price is too low. If it's too high, it's very probable that the groom cannot afford the bride price at all and that the marriage won't take place, which is something that happens very often. So you see, it's a whole ordeal, and for many Bear Branches, getting married has simply become an unattainable goal. This is the topic of the day, and see you next time at What's on Weibo.
Now, this PowerPoint shows you a one-child policy. They have since lightened that restriction. And the main reason why is that there would be people who would have only one child and then their son or daughter would die in a car accident and they'd sit there and say, I did what I'm supposed to, but now I don't pass on my heritage and my family doesn't prosper. We're talking about a culture that respects and venerates their ancestors. And one of the ways they do that is by producing progeny to have kids keep going on. But having that loss, they can't. And so here they are messing with their old ancestral culture. So that's been very difficult for them to balance. So now they've asked for a lightening of restrictions on the one-child policy to allow 2 children and spread them out more. So, all right. One other thing to compare and to show you about China is this. This is a map of the number of cities over 1 million people. If you notice, the United States, these metro regions, there's about 10 of them. In China, there's 31. And this is just over 1 million. We're not talking to the multiple millions that some of these cities have. So, once again, there's your relative scale of cities in size. So, another thing is called the Green Revolution. And the thing, you might hear more about this next year, but it's a major deal that's so not gone over or given a lot of attention to. What I want to bring up with this one is that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the United States partnered with other countries like Mexico and India, developed technologies of hybridizing plants to make them more sustainable in varied climates and regions and resistant to disease. And because of this, it's produced a lot more food. Countries that used to be importing food are now exporting it. And there's new areas that can be brought into cultivation. And it's really changed. It's changed the number of the people we've had in the world. That's why the population doubled. So next up is environmental degradation. And so as you're used to seeing, the Taj Mahal, here's a better example of the other side of the Taj Mahal. All of this pollution in India and the deforestation going on in some of these islands. And, a place like Hong Kong, there's so much going on that's so disgusting that the best way to get a picture is just having a backdrop. I'm going to have a little mini segment on the amount of pollution in some of these rivers later, and it's probably the video I'm most looking forward to because this is one of the lessons I so wanted to teach you guys. So next up is the fishing market, and that's a major economic activity. And we're like, okay, cool, getting tuna or cod or somewhere else. Nope. In these areas, this is a super big deal. So in this case, they fight over it. There's a lot of regions where they delineate. They say this is where we can fish, this is where you can fish, and they fight over these boundaries based on international law. Now, because of that, some places, like Palau, have created a wildlife sanctuary where none of their waters can be used for fishing. So, culture. First off, super densely populated. These are some of the mega cities you see. I already showed you the population, but there's also places, sparse population. Look here in very Western China. That's their city. That's their town. I mean, gorgeous view, of course, but not that many people. So here's two examples. Oh, sorry. This is of yurts in Mongolia, just to show you how sparse and flat the Gobi Desert and those areas are. You see these cities. So here's two videos coming up. One of them is showing you these pod hotels in Tokyo, and another one is the Tokyo Metro Transit. So you can see those of you who are claustrophobic or don't like touching, you might not enjoy these spaces. So check them out.
Want to see the world's smallest hotel room? Follow me as I show you a capsule hotel in Tokyo. The check-in process is very similar to a regular hotel. You can walk in and then ask for a room. So I'm given a yukata-style uniform, and my pod number is number 16, and this is a key for my locker. So we're gonna head to the locker first and leave my bags and belongings here. Here on the diagram you see two numbers for one section, so this indicates that it has two bunks, an upper bunk and a lower bunk. Let's check out where number 15 is. It's just across the hall. Here we are. Pretty spacious, huh? Not exactly a coffin, however slightly larger than that. Just enough space for a person to sleep and sit in. As you step inside, you manage to notice there is a pillow, blanket, mattress, light adjustment here. I have a fan attached to here as well, and even a small TV. Yes, they managed to fit the small TV in the capsule pod. Early in the morning, alarm starts going off, hinting guests to check out. Restrooms and bath areas are communal. The hotels are largely used by office workers who have missed their last train. Most of the guests are male, but there are some capsule hotels that have a separate section for females as well. At some of them, you can even buy new shirts and pants for your new day. Per night stay is somewhere between $25 to $50. Not bad for a city like Tokyo. I had a pleasant time in the capsule hotel, and now I'm going to check out. This is Ryoko, showing you Tokyo.
All right, religious diversity. Hinduism, Buddhism, Shinto, all of these different religions are all over Asia, as you can see, and here's a map of it too. This one video I'm going to show you, this is a Tibetan monk, and before you're just like, I'm going to hear this guy chanting, listen to it. He can sing a chord, and it's taken a long time to practice, but he can sing several notes at once, so check it out. Next up, major conflicts in this region. First, over India and Pakistan, you have the conflict in Kashmir, where they both compete over who has possession of it. This is what Kashmir looks like. It's the foothills of the Himalayas and some of those beautiful places to go in the world. The problem is it's being fought over. And so it's hard to get out there and see all these things because of the conditions of conflict between the two. To illustrate that, this is the border closing ceremony between India and Pakistan, India being Hindu and Pakistan being Muslim.
Suddenly the atmosphere gets heavier as the closing of the border ceremony begins. Now this is more like it. Officers seem to be selected on the basis of their facial hair. But facial hair alone is not enough. You also have to gain approval from the Ministry of Silly Walks before being signed up for this job. These strutting peacocks aren't confined to the Indian side of the border. Not to be outdone, the Pakistanis take the evening display every bit as seriously.
Okay, here's another interesting thing is in Japan and Korea, they have what's called a homogeneous society. What that means is the population is almost ethnically almost all the same. Because of that, it's found there's been some problems in terms of acceptance of people that are different or disabilities even. In Japan, it's very looked down upon to have any form of physical deformity. In Korea, the beauty standard is so set that as much as you might think these women probably do all look alike, that's because they do, and it's on purpose. Most of these women have had plastic surgery. And so bad that I have a quote for you. In 2012, Miss Korea was revealed to have had plastic surgery. And when the critics claimed that it was an unfair advantage, she said, "I never said I was born beautiful." So the differences in what we tell our kids here, and that the standard of beauty can be varied, whereas to them, there's only one way. It's also a problem is that most girls in high school, as a graduation gift, ask for plastic surgery. That's how prevalent this stuff is. One of the other examples to give you is this surgery, as you can see on their eye folds. And a lot of Chinese and Asian actors in the 70s and 80s got these surgeries so that they looked a little bit more Western to Western audiences, so they could be better in Hollywood. Now, though, a lot of Asian actors or Asian American actors have foregone that and do not want any change in their original identity. Cultural heritage. So silks, made from silkworms. It's a nice fabric. We got batik, which is this wax and dye on cloth. Wood and ivory carvings. Wood and ivory made from the bone of animal, usually rhino or elephant, which has become a big problem. There's a really cool Netflix series called Trafficked, I believe it is, and there's one of them that talks about bone and rhinos. Ideograms. So these are unique characters, and you're going to learn a little Chinese right now. So get ready, because at the end, there's a couple questions on it. Good luck. jewels. A lot of jewelry, particularly rare gemstones, are found in these regions. All right, cultural landscape. So Taj Mahal, it's in India. It was the Shah's favorite wife in the 1600s. So that's what it is. It's above ground tomb or a mausoleum. Angkor Wat is probably the largest temple complex ever discovered. It's larger than Paris. So here's a cool video about that in Cambodia. Which wasn't just one wall. It was the process of building multiple walls. And a lot of times the purpose of it was not just to keep people out, but to prevent them from escaping with all the loot. So you would easily climb or get past the wall when you only had about one person every 10 feet guarding it. So your army could easily go over it at some points, but to leave with everything you've stolen would be very difficult. And floating markets are these markets that are just on water. People will bring in their goods from farming and whatnot and go to a market, and they'd float around and sell their goods. So I always have fun jokes about, whose boat is the Apple store? Like, hey guys, I got these great electronics. Someone hits you. What do you do? Obviously you're lucky there's a lot of rice around. So you'd be like, well, that one, see, look, it still works after 3 days of being in the rice. So I know, awkward and dumb and shut up, Mr. Johnson, but oh well. That was just one of my silly things I always thought about. But anyway, here's two examples. One's a floating market and one's how a market exists right on a train track. So enjoy. So mosques and minarets, there's a lot of Muslims. Temples and shrines. That's a Shinto arch that you see right above me. Shinto is the national religion of Japan, and it combines Buddhism as well as like a spirit worship as well. So there's this connection with nature. So even though there's a lot of Japanese who now are in major cities, they still recognize the significance of going out into the countryside and coming back. Pagodas are these curve-shaped roof buildings, and they're meant to ward off spirits, so they don't trap spirits within their compound. That's why the roofs curve outward. And it's mainly for Buddhists that use this. Terraced rice fields, so those are those stair-step farming patterns. And cities. Look at that, all done. Laters.
According to the Daily Mail, across China, wet markets are reopening.
These wet markets are gross.
I think they should shut down those things right away.
They're just absolutely disgusting, selling exotic animals.
That's a place where consumers buy the meat of wild animals to eat, including bats.
So let's go to a wet market, I guess. This is probably going to be a little bit different than many of the other kind of like shock videos that you'll see on Facebook or whatever. This is basically just a normal run-of-the-mill neighborhood wet market. I just kind of wanted to share the actual reality of the situation instead of this kind of weird, twisted version that seems to be going around online. So, okay, so first I just kind of want to talk definitions real quick. So, what is a wet market? This comes from Hong Kong English, which ends up coming from the original Cantonese, where you would have things that are dried goods, ganhuo. So stuff like ganhuo would be things like dried seafood would be things like canned goods, and those would be things that would be in like the ganhua section of a market. Stuff that isn't dried goods is sold in a wet market. So that would be stuff like fresh produce, fresh meats, this kind of thing. So in some ways, your local farmer's market would be considered a wet market here. So, for example, like you can get all different kinds of fruit and vegetable and meats. And like, honestly, if you're somebody that loves food, these are just awesome places to walk around, hang out, buy stuff. They're all shipped fresh every day from farms. And they're honestly one of the great things about living in China. All kinds of tofu products, including tofu puffs. My favorite thing. Oh, jiafuju. Maybe jiafuju is my favorite thing. Okay, so hygiene standards. This is honestly going to vary wildly from wet market to wet market. If you go to like a wet market in Hong Kong nowadays, the hygiene standards they're pretty good. Maybe it's not quite as nice as going into a Whole Foods, but it's within that category. Within mainland China, it's really going to depend on the market. What I would say for this one that you're looking at right now, I would call this about average, maybe slightly above average. They do a pretty decent job here, but what you're seeing isn't necessarily out of the ordinary. So I can already start to feel you getting a little bit antsy. You might be thinking, what? It's a Chinese wet market. Where are all of the exotic live wild animals? Where are all the bats? But you see, that's the frustrating bit. That's the reality of the situation, is that most markets don't have anything to do with exotic live wild animals. They're just markets that's the same as your farmer's market, a little bit dirtier, a little bit more variety, and they always have fresh meat. Here's the point. I know that people are scared right now. It's a scary time, and during scary times, people want scapegoats. But this is a wet market right here. It's a normal wet market, and there's no bats, there's no pangolins. It's just a place where people shop. So yelling on social media that it's open, like it's some kind of like terrible thing, is just disconnected from reality. So I think especially during these kinds of times, it's important for us to keep that connection to reality, because there's people out there that want to manipulate you. So really just try to keep your head straight, ask questions, and yeah.
I found a natural corn dog out in the wild. Let's taste it.